You might already have this coin somewhere in your home, tucked inside an old drawer, resting quietly in a forgotten jar. And if you ignore it, you could be overlooking something far more valuable than you ever imagined. And if you find these kinds of stories interesting, the kind that reveal hidden value in everyday things, you might consider subscribing. Not now, but perhaps after you hear what this small coin could truly mean. At first glance, the 5-cent elephant coin, the Strength of Africa design, feels ordinary. Many people have seen it, held it, maybe even spin it without a second thought. It carries the image of the elephant, a symbol of power, endurance, and memory, something deeply connected to the African land. But here's the quiet truth most people don't realize. Not every one of these coins is just a coin. Some collectors believe that certain versions, depending on the year, the minting process, and even the smallest details, can carry a value far beyond what is printed on the surface. Now, imagine this for a moment. A coin you once ignored, a coin that may still be sitting somewhere in your house, could be quietly increasing in value without you even knowing. And what makes this even more interesting is that many people only discover this too late. Because the difference between a common coin and a rare one is often something the untrained eye completely misses. Take the elephant design itself. On most coins, it appears sharp, strong, and well-defined. But in rare situations, slight variations in the engraving, a softer detail, a shifted alignment, or an unusual texture can signal something collectors pay very close attention to. And this is where things begin to change. At first, a typical 5-cent elephant coin might only be worth its face value, or perhaps just a little more to a casual buyer. But then, depending on condition, that same coin could reach $10, maybe even $50 in a better preserved state. Not life-changing yet, but enough to make you pause. Now here's where the story deepens. Because condition alone is not the full picture. Some collectors look for coins that were never widely circulated. Coins that avoided the wear and tear of everyday use. Coins that stayed hidden, protected, almost forgotten. In those cases, the value begins to climb further. $100, $300, sometimes even more at certain auctions. And this is usually the point where people start paying attention. But what most don't realize is that the real value is often hidden one layer deeper. Because there are moments in minting history, rare, almost accidental moments, where something unusual happens. A slight misprint, a variation in metal composition, a batch that was produced differently from the rest. And when those rare situations occur, the coin stops being common. It becomes a story. It becomes a hunt. And collectors, especially experienced ones, are willing to pay significantly more for something that stands apart. Now, think about this carefully. How many times have coins passed through your hands without a second glance? How many times have you assumed they were all the same? Because this is exactly how valuable pieces slip through unnoticed. Now, in some cases, a rare 5-cent elephant coin with unique characteristics has been known to reach into the thousands. Yes, thousands. And for many people, that alone is surprising enough. But we're not at the most interesting part yet. Because there's one detail, one quiet factor, that changes everything. Time. Coins like these, especially those tied to strong cultural symbols like the elephant, tend to grow in significance as years pass. Collectors begin to see them not just as currency, but as pieces of history. And history, when preserved correctly, becomes valuable, very valuable. So when you combine rarity, condition, historical relevance, and collector demand, something unexpected begins to happen. The value doesn't just increase, it accelerates. And this is where the story takes a turn most people never expect. Because in rare and exceptional cases, where all the right conditions align, where the coin is nearly flawless, where its origin carries something unusual, where collectors compete quietly behind the scenes. The value can rise far beyond normal expectations. Not hundreds, not thousands, but something far greater. Some collectors believe, and in certain auction environments it has been suggested, that a truly exceptional 5-cent elephant strength of Africa coin, under the rarest circumstances, could reach extraordinary figures. Figures that most people would never associate with such a small object. And this is where the silence becomes important. Because these moments don't always make headlines. They don't always get announced loudly. They happen quietly, between serious collectors, behind closed bids, where only a few truly understand what they're looking at. And in those rare, almost unbelievable cases, that small coin, that simple piece of metal, could reach a value of up to $35 million. Now, not every coin will reach this level. In fact, most won't. But that's not the point. The point is, you don't know which one might. And that uncertainty, that possibility, is what makes this so important. Because right now, somewhere in your home, there could be coins you haven't looked at in years. Coins sitting in old boxes, drawers, or containers you rarely open. And among them, there could be something worth far more than you think. Not because it looks different, but because it is different in ways that only become clear when you take the time to notice. So before you dismiss another coin, before you assume it holds no value, take a closer look. Because sometimes, the smallest things carry the greatest stories. And if you're curious to discover more hidden pieces like this, more coins that may be quietly waiting to be recognized, then this might be the right time to subscribe and continue this journey of uncovering what others often overlook. Because you never really know what you already have until you truly look at it. And even after hearing all of this, there is still something most people overlook, something quietly sitting beneath the surface of this story. Because the 5-cent elephant coin is not just about value, it's about recognition. Recognition of details that others ignore. You see, experienced collectors often say, the real difference is not in the coin itself, but in the eyes that examine it. Two people can hold the exact same coin. One sees spare change, the other sees a possibility. And that difference can mean everything. Now, imagine going back, not years, but decades, to a time when these coins were actively used. Passed from hand to hand, carried in pockets, exchanged in markets, with no thought of what they might become. Back then, no one stopped to think. This one might be special. No one separated them carefully. No one stored them with gloves. No one imagined a future where collectors would study them so closely. And that is exactly why truly remarkable pieces become rare. Because they survived without intention. They endured by chance. And that brings us to another quiet detail, one that many people miss entirely. Where most coins show signs of life. Small scratches, faded edges, softened features. These are normal, expected, almost unavoidable. But in rare situations, a coin appears almost untouched. As if time simply passed it by. The elephant design still sharp, the surface still bright, the edges still defined. Collectors notice this immediately. Because a coin like that tells a different story. It suggests it was set aside early, protected, forgotten in a place where it didn't face the world like the others. And when such a coin appears, especially from an older series, the interest grows quietly, but quickly. Now think about this. How many places in your home have not been checked in years? Old cabinets, storage boxes, family collections passed down without much attention. Because this is often where these coins are found. Not in shops, not in markets, but in places where time stood still. And here's something even more interesting. Sometimes, the value isn't just in the coin's condition, but in subtle differences most people would never notice. For example, the spacing of the lettering, the alignment of the elephant, the depth of the engraving. These may sound like small things, but to a trained collector, they can signal something uncommon. And when something uncommon is discovered, it creates quiet excitement. Not loud, not obvious, but steady. The kind of interest that builds behind the scenes. And at certain auctions, where experienced buyers gather, this is where things start to shift. Because now, it's not about what the coin looks like to everyone. It's about what it means to the right person. At this stage, values begin to move differently. A coin once worth a few dollars now finds itself reaching 500, 800, sometimes even crossing $1,000 depending on its uniqueness. And for many viewers, that alone feels surprising. But again, we're only moving deeper into the story. Because there is another layer, one that adds even more weight to the coin's potential. Historical timing. Coins produced during certain years, especially those connected to specific economic or political periods, can carry added interest. They become more than objects. They become markers of time. And collectors, especially those who have spent decades in this field, understand the significance of that. They don't just see metal. They see a moment captured, something that cannot be recreated. And when that moment aligns with rarity and condition, the value rises again. Now we begin to see figures like 2,000, 5,000, sometimes even higher depending on the exact characteristics. And this is usually the point where people begin to feel something shift inside them. A realization. A question. What if I've overlooked something like this? And that question is exactly what leads many people to start checking their old collections. But here's where things take another unexpected turn. Because in some rare situations, the story of a coin becomes known. Not widely, but within collector circles. A particular variation, a known misprint, a small batch that was different from the rest. And once that information spreads quietly among serious buyers, the demand increases. Not suddenly, but steadily. And when demand rises, so does competition. This is where auctions become interesting. Because now, it's not just about owning a coin. It's about securing something rare, something not easily found again. And when 2 or 3 determined collectors focus on the same piece, the price begins to move in ways most people would not expect. 10,000, 15,000, sometimes even more, depending on how rare the coin truly is. And all of this, for something many people once carried in their pocket without a second thought. Now pause for a moment and think carefully. How many coins have you handled in your lifetime? How many have you dismissed without looking twice? Because this is how hidden value stays hidden. Not because it isn't there, but because it isn't recognized. And recognition takes patience. It takes curiosity. It takes a willingness to look closer when others don't. Now, as we move toward the deeper end of this story, there's one more element to consider. Preservation. Coins that are carefully stored, protected from air, moisture, and handling, tend to maintain their original state. And over time, that preservation becomes more valuable than the coin itself. Because while many coins degrade, a few remain almost unchanged. And those few become highly desirable. Collectors don't just want rarity. They want quality. They want something that feels as close to its original form as possible. And when rarity meets preservation, that's when things truly begin to change. Now we start seeing values that move beyond expectation. 20,000, 30,000, even higher in exceptional cases. And by now, the idea should feel clear. This isn't about every coin. It's about the right coin at the right time in the right condition. And that combination is what creates extraordinary outcomes. But even at this stage, we haven't reached the most powerful part of the story. Because there are moments, rare, quiet moments, where everything aligns perfectly. A coin with unique characteristics, a nearly flawless condition, a known rarity within collector communities, and a setting where serious buyers are ready. In those moments, something unusual happens. The value doesn't rise gradually anymore. It jumps. And when it jumps, it can reach levels that feel almost impossible to believe. This is where whispers begin. Stories shared between collectors. Private discussions. Careful attention. Because these coins are no longer just collectibles. They become treasures. And in those rare, exceptional, almost once-in-a-lifetime situations, the 5-cent elephant strength of Africa coin can move into a category very few objects ever reach. A category where value is not just measured in money, but in rarity, history, and demand combined. And yes, in those extraordinary circumstances, it has been suggested and quietly believed among certain circles that such a coin could reach figures as high as $35 million, a number that feels distant, almost unreal, yet tied to something so small, so easily overlooked. And that is what makes this story so powerful, because it reminds us of something simple but important. Value is not always visible. Sometimes it waits. It hides in plain sight until someone takes the time to see it. So before you move on, before you forget this moment, take a little time. Look through your old coins. Check the ones you haven't touched in years. Because somewhere among them, there could be a story waiting to be discovered. And if you continue exploring these hidden possibilities, if you stay curious, if you keep looking closer, you may begin to see things differently. And if you'd like to uncover more stories like this, more quiet discoveries, more overlooked treasures, then consider subscribing and staying with this journey. Because sometimes, the greatest value is already in your hands, waiting to be noticed.